The world around us can be a confusing and complicated place, especially if you're a child. We talk to Bree Shirvell, journalist and author, about her new book, Parenting in a Climate Crisis. Plus, we take a look at other stories making the headlines from around the region. This is Connecticut East This Week. Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith. If you're a kid, the world sometimes can feel like a scary place with all the news that we see and hear online and in the media. And if you're a parent, trying to keep your kids informed and up to date on what's happening can also be a challenge as well. When it comes to things like climate change, how do you keep your kids informed, accountable, and hopefully start them on a path of doing things individually and as a family that can help the environment and the planet and provide them with tools they can use as they become the next stewards of the planet? I sat down with Mystic-based environmental journalist and mum Bree Shirvell to talk about her new book, Parenting in a Climate Crisis, a handbook for turning fear into action. Bridget, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we're going to get into the fact that you have written your very first book. We'll be talking about that very shortly. You are, like me, a fellow journalist. You write on many different topics, the environment being one of them. Just give us a little sense of who is Bridget Shirvell.
Oh, that's a good question. I grew up in Mystic, Connecticut. I moved away for a little bit. I am back here now, and I originally came to journalism because I loved telling stories, and I really started in the food journalism world.
So food, environment, you write across a broad range of topics. What got you interested in those?
It was personal interest. I think growing up in Mystic, Connecticut, you're surrounded by so many local shops and a lot of local farmers. The local fishermen are there. And so from a very young age, I was always going to those local places with my parents. And so that kind of, I guess I would say that background made me think a lot about our impact on local economies, but also the planet and just everything that we do.
You've now turned to writing your journalism. People would have read it in such great publications as the New York Times, Teen Vogue, Martha Stewart Living, Good Housekeeping, and many others. But so many journalists, there is a book inside us. You've decided to write one, a very personal book called Parenting in a Climate Crisis, a handbook for turning fear into action. Talk to us about how that came about.
So the book really came about from an article I did for Good Housekeeping magazine back in 2019. And when I was doing that article, it was a story that I pitched to the editor with this idea of, can I climate proof my child? Like, I know the climate crisis is happening. Like, what is she going to need to grow up in that world? And when I started the initial research for that article, I was really focused on survivalist skills. Does she need to know how to can her own food, grow her own food, know how to sew? And when I was talking to the different sources I used in that piece, what they kept coming back to was this idea of resilience and how you can help nurture resilience and what it means to be climate resilient. And so from that, I realized that there was a lot more information that I could go into that kind of could be a book. That's really the background of it.
And how long did this book take? Because looking at it, I've had a cursory glance. I've not read the entire thing. It's 224 great pages of information. I will get round to it, I promise. But how long did it take? Because it's packed full of a lot of information from a lot of different sources. And as a fellow journalist, I know even with today's technology and the internet, that's all great, but you still have to make sure that all of that information is verified and it's correct. So give us a sense of how long it took you to do that.
So the actual writing didn't take that long, but the research, as you mentioned, took a very long time. From start to publication, it was probably like 4.5 years. I basically had the beginnings of a book proposal about 4 years ago, and then went through many rounds of edits with an agent, just the process of finding an agent. And then it was really a lot of research. One of the things that I think I benefited from was that because of the work that I was already doing. I was already speaking to a lot of the people that I ended up interviewing for the book. And so I was just able to add on these questions in a natural progression.
Yeah, that's a good old journalist trick. If you're sort of like doing a project and, as you say, you get hold of somebody and you think, oh, hang on a minute, I'll get the interview out of the way and then let's see if I can add some of that extra stuff in as well. Now, you, of course, are a mother of a daughter. I believe she's 6 years old.
Yeah, she is.
I'm going to read something which is like at the very beginning of the book because I found it very powerful. And obviously, that can help springboard the rest of the conversation about the book. So, I'm just going to read this excerpt here from your actual book. In late spring of 2023, when smoke from wildfires in Canada engulfed much of the northeastern US, including our coastal town for a week, we had our first taste of that life. When my child asked to go outside after school and I said yes for a few minutes, but only if you wear a mask, I felt a stab of horror at how practical it sounded. My child, so used to masks from the pandemic, looked at me and asked, because the air may make me sick again? Yes, I said, and she accepted that. But eventually I know she'll ask why, if we can fix it, and how. It's a very profound section, as I say, very early in the book. Talk to us more about that.
So I think that is probably depending on parents and the ages of their kids is something that probably a lot of people grappled with. If you remember back to 2023 when we had all that wildfire smoke and those images that were coming out of New York City. And it was really a discussion a lot of parents were having, should our kids go outside and what does that look like? And it was also oh, they don't think twice about it because this generation of kids wore masks for 2 years, basically, when they went to school or when they went to the doctor's office or when they were on the playground. They don't necessarily think of it the same way we do. And there was a lot of just, oh my God, what are we doing? Why is this already happening? I think for doing the work that I have done, knew what the future was going to hold, but I think I wasn't expecting it to make this much of an impact on our daily lives this soon.
As you look at the book, and it came out fairly recently, what sort of reactions have you had from people so far? Because I'm just going to play devil's advocate for a moment with you. I think some people might say, is this overdoing the situation? That yes, there is a climate situation here. And I think most reasonable people will accept that there is a climate crisis or a climate situation to some or lesser degree. But are we putting too much on our children when it comes to this? Are we putting them through maybe unnecessary stress? What would you say to that? Because I'm sure you've probably had those comments from people, haven't you?
Not really. And I think that those types of comments are very political in the US. I don't think that's what most everyday Americans or people around the world really think. There's a study that came out very recently that found that 89% of people worldwide want climate action. The reality is we just don't talk about it enough. There's also studies that I talked about in my book that deal with the majority of kids have climate anxiety now. But when you look down into the details of that study, they're not anxious because of what's happening. They're anxious because of our failure to do anything about it. And so I think the book really came from a place of, okay, I can't necessarily make my government take action, but what are things that I can do?
What about the social media side? Because, of course, we're constantly being bombarded with social media. Even the best adults get taken in by misinformation. Do you think the social media is playing into this narrative as well?
Oh, yeah, of course. And I think, there's a whole section on my book on how we talk about the climate crisis. And part of that chapter actually goes into how to evaluate information and both for yourself, but also for your kids and how to help them to do that. Because I think those media literacy skills are something that we haven't really focused as much as we should be focusing on.
Let's talk a little bit more about the book. As we said, 224 pages of incredible writing, stories, research, science, etc. You've split it into four parts. I love this. I'm looking at the contents page. You've got part one, which is feel, part two, which is love, part three, which is build, and part four, that is act. Talk us through a little bit about part one, which talks about talking about your feelings and also grief as well.
So all of the sections build on each other, but the book is also designed that you could technically pick it up and read a chapter that you're the most interested in. If you're having a hard time with climate anxiety, for instance, you could pick up that chapter. Or if you're really interested in how you can reduce your carbon footprint, you could pick up the chapter on food. But I really wanted to start off the book with the things that I think most people first think about when they think about the climate crisis in kids, and that really is how you talk to them about it. And then also just how you help them process their emotions, how you think through your own emotions around it. So that's really those first two chapters of the book.
I know we said that your daughter is just 6 years old at the moment. What sort of questions is she asking you? Because we read that passage and you said at some point she's going to start asking more questions. Is she already? Has she looked at the book?
She's seen the book, but she hasn't really started to ask those types of questions yet. She does ask questions around why other people don't do things. For instance, like we have an electric car. She wants to know why not everybody has an electric car. And I think that is a really good question. And it's a good way for me to start setting the foundation of we have this electric car because that's what we chose to do and these are our values, but also not everybody can afford an electric car because there is somewhat of that like economic privilege that I think you have to grapple with when you're in environmental work, depending on who you are, and that it's okay that not everybody can buy an electric car.
Talk to us about the second part of the book. It's called Love, where you touch upon nature, animals, and curiosity.
So this next section is really about how we nurture kids who grow up to be environmentalists and want to protect the planet. And that's really by falling in love with nature. And also animals can play a huge role in that as well. It's just the family dog or the family cat, or even just being outside in your backyard or taking a walk around and looking at the birds. And then also really curiosity. Curiosity was this skill that when I was doing the initial research for that Good Housekeeping article, I kept coming back to as something that can help with resilience. And so that was an important like section to dive into how we can nurture kids' kind of natural curiosity.
And when we talk about children and their curiosity, again, how much of that is really natural, and how much of that maybe your research found that comes off of what they perceive is coming from their parents? Because obviously our children are with us for many hours of the day, or they're at school. So how much of that is their curiosity or stuff that actually comes in their direction from different sources?
It's definitely a balance. I think you really have to set the example of what you're going to do. And I talk a little about this in the curiosity chapter, right? I think anyone who has spent time around young kids knows that they ask a ton of questions. And then some of the research has found that as soon as kids enter school, those questions dwindle and they ask less and less questions. And some of that is just the nature of the school day, but it's also a chance for us to model as parents like when your child comes to you and has a question and you can take a moment to really dive into the answer behind that. And I know you can't do it all the time, right? Because my daughter would ask, why this, why that, a gazillion times a day. And I don't always have the time to find a good answer, but sometimes we can, and that really helps nurture that curiosity.
Without getting overly political, as we said, the book came out earlier this year. Of course, we find ourselves with a new administration with different ideas about how they want to run the country from former administrations. The environment certainly has become a front and center discussion point. The book really seems to have hit at the right time.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was intentional on our part. We actually had a conversation about whether or not we should push the book to publish in October before the election, and the timing just wasn't there. And in a lot of ways, I don't necessarily think it would have mattered no matter like what the outcome of the election was. I think obviously we're in a very hard time for environmentalists right now, but I would also say that the Democrats haven't done enough either. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in now.
Part three, it's entitled Build, and in that chapter, you talk about problem solving, food, and also consumerism.
So this next section was really about individual actions that people can take. And I think there's been a lot of like discussion or debate or back and forth over the past few years about if the climate crisis is individuals' responsibility or if it's a systematic issue. And I don't believe that those two are mutually exclusive. I think that obviously we need government and corporations to act, but I think that individuals can help influence that outcome. And so this next section of the book was really about the things that you can do in your everyday life. For most people, the biggest impact that they can make in terms of mitigating the climate crisis is with their food choices and with what they're buying. We need to buy less, is the reality. And then we also might need to make some tweaks to our diet. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be a vegetarian or vegan, but most Americans probably do need to eat less meat than they currently are.
And also from the food aspect as well, is it also tapping into being more local and trying to purchase things maybe that are grown in Connecticut? We grow quite a lot of different foods rather than having these out of season foods, which we know transportation, which adds to the climate crisis.
That's part of it too. And I think that's very hard to do, especially when you have a young child. My daughter, for instance, loves strawberries, and luckily pretty soon it will be strawberry season here again. But it's hard during the winter time to explain to her we're not necessarily going to buy strawberries at the supermarket because they're not coming locally.
And the consumerism bit, I'm guessing that's touching upon the big sort of places where we buy our stuff, the online stores. And again, is that about trying to go back to more local, maybe like small businesses? And we can't stop, sadly, buying from these big conglomerates, but
Right.
maybe just again looking at different ways where we can get these
Yeah.
products.
Yeah, it's definitely thinking about like other ways that you can get things or just reusing things when you can or passing them on. I have gotten much better about not just throwing something away, but saying, oh, hey, we have these like extra clothes that my child outgrew. Do you want them? Or even asking for other people. I ask a lot more now when I need something, if I can borrow it or if it's something that somebody has instead of just hitting buy on Amazon. And that is a big part of it. There was a study that came out recently that found that in the past 25 years, we've consumed as many goods as we did in the previous 100 years. So we're just buying. There's obviously more people in the world now, but we're also just buying a lot more things that we probably don't really need.
And then part four of the book is the action part of it. It talks about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, community and activism. Talk to us about that because action, of course, is essential if all of us are to try and tackle the climate crisis.
So this last section was really about the things that are more systematic change, but that individuals can still nudge a little bit. So the STEM section focuses a lot on schools, but also these schools that have pushed towards renewable energy and how they've even been able to incorporate that into lesson plans. And then it talks a little bit about both building community, which I think is, especially in the political climate we're in right now, very important, but also then how that community can spur more action.
And do you think like communities are coming together a little bit more?
I hope so. I think that under the first Trump administration, we definitely saw a lot of like state and local action in regards to climate initiatives when the federal government wasn't doing anything. And I know after the election, there's definitely a lot of talk from people I knew more in the progressive spectrum that spoke a lot about what can I do in my local community, and I'm going to strengthen those bonds. So I think that's part of it, but I still think that we're very divided as a society.
And even though the book, as we said, is called Parenting in a Climate Crisis, there's lessons for adults in there, isn't there?
I hope so. I hope it definitely makes people think a little bit differently. And I have heard from some people who've read it that, oh, that gave me some tips that I'm going to try to do in my own life.
Do you think activism is on the up? We've been seeing obviously protests recently, but they're not necessarily to do with the environment. But again, are you getting a sense from the work that you continue to do, not just the book, but as an environmental journalist? Do you feel that that sense of purpose is growing?
I will say I've seen a lot of activism among young people. I know that there's been a lot of kind of climate conferences that are being hosted around the country by high school and college students, and I think that's really great to see. I do think there's probably more that should be done on the like adult professional working level.
It's been great talking to you. And as we said, congratulations on the book, and especially in the amount of time that it took to put it together. I know that you've got an event coming up in August as well. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so I'm actually really excited for this August event because it's going to be the first event I've done that is geared towards both kids and parents. So it'll be at the Stonington Free Library on August 21st, and there will be some sort of activity for kids to do. I haven't 100% decided on what that's going to be, but hopefully the weather's nice and we'll be outside.
And of course, the book is available on Amazon and available in local bookstores as well. Environmental journalist and author Bree Shirvell, it's been great talking to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And if you want to find out more about Bree and how to order her book, then visit her website at Bree Shirvell, that's BreeShirvell.com.
We asked parents who adopted teens to share their journey.
We just kind of knew from the beginning that we were family.
They showcased a sense of love that I never had before. I mean, he's not only my parent, like he's like my best friend.
At the end of the day, it's all been worth it. I wouldn't change a thing about our lives.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. Visit adoptuskids.org to learn more. Brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
Time now for a look at other stories making the headlines this week. Connecticut's General Assembly passed another version of the Trust Act, an update to strengthen the state's immigration laws. Not everyone is pleased with the result, as Edwin J. Vieira from the Connecticut News Service reports.
The Trust Act prevents local and state law enforcement agencies from having to work with immigration and customs enforcement to detain immigrants. Lawmakers introduced a more comprehensive bill, but the General Assembly passed only the enforcement portion of it. Juan Fonseca Tapia with the Trust Act Now campaign says the parts they left out are essential to the state's immigrant community.
The two other pieces within the law, we introduced protecting people's personal information and also the act to bar ICE out of courthouses. Those are two very important things that directly impact folks.
The initial bill faced opposition from some lawmakers, falsely claiming it would make Connecticut a sanctuary for immigrants who want to commit crimes. But some of the provisions were removed, as some lawmakers felt they would make the state a target for retribution by the Trump administration. Tapia says he and other groups will continue rallying support for more updates to the Trust Act in 2026. I'm Edwin J. Vieira.
Scientists at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station working on a PFAS project in the state of Maine have had their funding cut and the project shut down by the Environmental Protection Agency. Dr. Sarah Nason from the experiment station said they're confused by what's happening, as the project was looking at contaminated land owned by the Micmac tribe and meets all the EPA's current PFAS research criteria.
We put in this research proposal to combine some field work up in Maine looking at farms that have been potentially contaminated, as well as culturally important plants and animals and food sources for the tribe, and then combining that with some more technical PFAS detection method research here at the Ag Station and at the University of Virginia. Really, the study has now been cut off.
Nason said despite the order to stop work, the tribe and farmers are carrying on.
Representatives from the tribe up in Maine, they're continuing to collect their samples as they plan, still growing crops in the farm that's possibly contaminated and still storing fiddlehead and potentially later in the season moose samples. They're going to be stored in the freezer, so in the event that we are able to continue work and get funding back, we'll still be able to do some of it. Right now, we just have very preliminary data that we're not so comfortable telling results from because, you need proper replication to really give good quality science.
The project is a collaboration with the University of Virginia, and Nason says an appeal has been lodged to see if funding can be restored, which totals over $1.5 million. The Maine Morning Star newspaper reported on the story and a statement they received from the EPA on the matter, saying they are reviewing their grant programs, and the Biden-Harris administration had forced radical DEI programs on the agency against its core mission of protecting human health and the environment. After 12 hours of debate and a series of failed Republican amendments, the Connecticut Senate approved a new 2-year state budget for fiscal years 2026 and 2027. The budget is a result of a deal negotiated by legislative leaders and Governor Ned Lamont. It passed on a 25-11 party line vote. According to the Office of Fiscal Analysis, the budget, introduced as House Bill 7287, appropriates $27.1 billion in the 2026 fiscal year and $28.6 billion in 2027. The OFA estimated the budget will be $900,000 under the spending cap in 2026 and $75.2 million under the cap in 2027. Some of the items in the bill include increases to Medicaid funding and the distribution of $250 checks to all earned income tax credit eligible households with a child, about 85,000 households in all. The budget bill includes other items, including the SHIELD Act, which protects healthcare providers and recipients from liability from another state after lawfully engaging in reproductive or gender-affirming care in Connecticut. The budget also includes components of Senate Bill 7, a healthcare bill that passed the House and Senate and includes other broad protections for reproductive and gender-affirming care, as well as emergency services, opioid response efforts, and public health infrastructure. Two different sets of workers in the state in different industries successfully negotiated new work contracts which stopped strike action for one and avoided strike action for the other. Over 3,000 Pratt & Whitney workers in East Hartford and Middletown ended strike action that began on May 5th after ratification of a deal agreed between their union, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local 1746 and 700, and the company. The new 4-year deal was endorsed by a 74.1% yes vote during a members' meeting at the Toyota Oakdale Theatre in Wallingford recently. Some highlights of the new deal, according to a press release from the IAM union, includes job security, wage increases, and pension plan increases. Pratt & Whitney said they were pleased both sides were able to reach an agreement. Meanwhile, Senate Minority Leader Stephen Harding said it showed how unaffordable the state of Connecticut has become for both job creators and employees. Last time Pratt & Whitney machinists went out on strike was 2001, and over 1,800 electric boat unionized draftsmen in Groton and New London ratified a new 5-year contract with their employer, avoiding strike action at the 11th hour. Members of MDA Local 571 were just hours away from strike action when the tentative deal was brokered. The new contract brings unprecedented wage increases of 30% over the lifetime of the agreement, as well as better promotion progression at the company and a $1,500 ratification bonus. Bill Lewis, the president of MDA Local 571, thanked his members for their support and solidarity. In a statement, Electric Boat said they were pleased the company and the union were able to reach an agreement recognizing the essential role the MDA members bring to the production of submarines for the U.S. Navy. That's all from us for this edition. Do send us your questions and story ideas to the show via our website at connecticut-east.com or Facebook or Twitter at Connecticut East and on Instagram at Connecticut East This Week. And you can listen to the show again on our social platforms, on demand, and by asking your smart speaker to play Connecticut East This Week podcast. And please like, follow, and share on your social media too. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thank you for listening.